What's up, gentlemen? This is Rising Phoenix Podcast, a podcast about how to rise up after your divorce. I'm your host, divorce coach, Michael Rhodes. Let's get into it. Joining me today is Mr. Mark Azoulay. Mark, let's just jump right into it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a psychotherapist based in the Denver area. I live actually in rural Colorado in Evergreen, and I run a company called Men's Therapy Online. You could probably guess what we do. We do men's therapy online. So I've been in private practice for over 10 years. I focus on men's issues, and we do individual therapy. We run men's groups. We're currently running 8, and then we do retreats as well in the Colorado wilderness. So the goal of that is to kind of like help men get back on their feet or take their lives to the next level.
Interesting. I'd like to dive a little bit more into sort of your story, just out of curiosity, but maybe we'll do that later. So one of the things that I like to do always, depending on the topic at hand, is I like to define it first. Mm-hmm. And I think at least one of the main topics today, if not the topic, will be masculinity. Mm-hmm. So a lot of folks throw that word around and they put some prefixes sometimes, including toxic and all kinds of different things. So Let's start by defining masculinity. What to you does that mean?
Yeah, so there's 2 kind of parts to that question, right? So there is masculinity, or maybe male as the sex, right? As like you're born male or female, that's genes, that's biology, right? I'm not sure where you are politically, but some people very far to the left are saying there's no difference between men and women. There are significant differences between men and women when they're born. It's one of the most highly validated research studies, right? If you're in a research study, the easiest way to put in any kind of differentiator is, hey, what are the male participants doing and what are the female participants doing, right? And there's significant differences between men and women biologically. So we're looking at what that looks like is we tend to be better at certain skills, specifically spatial reasoning and computational skills, right? We tend to have more muscle mass. We tend to, have more explosive power, right? Our metabolisms are different. We tend to be heavier. There's significant differences in the way that like the male brain and body work. And we can get into that more if you're interested. And then the second part is the gender part, right? And that's more masculinity. And that has changed over the years, right? I do think it clusters around certain kind of themes. Kind of my current version of masculinity is the 4 values of strength, courage, mastery, and honor. And again, we can talk about those. And I think those have been pretty consistent throughout history. But if you look at what it means to be a man, like style has changed, jobs have changed, right? Masculinity has changed significantly over time. If you think of like, maybe the most extreme example is like medieval, Britain, where you had like the dandy men, right? That were like, flowery tops, and they had like high heels and they had wigs, right? Stuff that would be like very feminine now was actually like the height of masculinity, in the like 1700s, right? So kind of the accoutrement change. But I do think that there are some core tenets to being a man that seem to be consistent across cultures.
Yeah, I mean there's a lot there. That was like throwing a grenade.
Yeah, pick up the shrapnel, man. I mean, whatever you want to go on, I can just keep digging. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some personal interest on like some of the brain stuff, like differences, but I don't know. Maybe we'll save that for another one. But let's start or sort of keep going with sort of the evolution of it, where you mentioned that like in the past it was this way and now it's this way. Mm-hmm. So it clearly has evolved, and it's definitely different from even the 60s, I would say, in some ways. And I think I guess one of my questions is when people talk about masculinity, what do you think the common sort of person is imagining to be, or the common definition? Because what I believe is people sort of hearken back to like the 50s and the 60s, and that's sort of what their view of masculinity is. You think that's kind of the case?
I think that's the case. I got a whole thing about this. So please also interrupt me because I can just like fire hose information. I'm an expert in this, so I could talk about this shit all day. But so yes, the short answer is yes. I think masculinity is going through a major crisis right now. Right, I think it is being forced to change mainly as a reaction to the feminist movement. Right, and I'm for feminism. I think it's great that women can have jobs, equal rights, all for it. And I think masculinity really shook the bedrock of what we were. Right, I mean, we were the providers, we were the wallet in the relationship, we were the protector. Like we had our role was clear, and it was highly based on, of course, women's roles at the time. And I think masculinity, we're kind of going through ours right now. And you see that there's a subset of the population, just like you said, that want to turn the clock back. Right. And every new change is people that want to go back and people that want to go forward. So some people want to go back and they want to go back to that 1950s dude. Right.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of value in that, actually, right? I mean, there's some of those things I mentioned again, strength, courage, mastery, and honor. There is something to that core that I don't want to lose, right? However, that's not where our time is. Men are being called to be more emotional, right? I know your podcast is on divorce, right? As a father, we're being called to be way more engaged than we ever have,
Fuck
you
yeah.
know, right? And which is great, and I think there's a major, assumption where they think that masculinity has always been this 1950s thing. And like I was saying before, it hasn't. Like that isn't pure masculinity. That's just like the more recent version that we can think of, that people are trying to turn the clock back to because it's close enough to reach into. Um, and then you have people that are going forward, right? That are looking for a more emotional version, a more grounded version. I think where things where the 70s and 60s went a little wrong, in my opinion, is they were trying to get in touch with their feminine side, right? You think of like the hippie movement, and they were trying to disown masculinity, right? Because their fathers were those 1950s kind of shut off, bully, toxic, masculine, kind of alcoholic dudes, right? The kind of stereotype,
Yeah.
right? So they went opposite of that versus becoming more masculine, right? Like I think men can and should do emotions. Obviously, that's my job. But I think there's a masculine way to do emotions, right? There's a masculine way to show love. There's a masculine way to be compassionate that isn't just mimicking what women are doing. And that's what I hope to move my guys towards, is that more kind of modern version of masculinity.
Yeah, boy, man, this is there's a lot to this. I'm a bit sort of taken aback about like where what do we focus on? Because there's so many aspects of this, and I think
Yeah.
it's very complex. I don't think it's simple.
Yes.
I think that there are certainly certain folks who have. I mean, everybody has a fucking opinion, right? But like, I mean, certain folks are louder about it than others. But um, let me focus in on kind of what you're saying about so compassion. I think is something that's important as a human, right?
Mhm.
I think we need to have that. But how do you see that as different from a man versus a woman? Like what is a masculine version of compassion?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So there's a great book called Of Boys and Men by Richard Reeves, where it's basically a massive meta-analysis of a bunch of studies, psychological studies and biological studies. One of my favorite studies that answers this question is in there, where essentially it's a little creepy, but they had like hidden cameras on playgrounds, right? So a little, whatever, it's a different time.
Uh,
And they were looking at fathers versus moms, right? And how they played with young children, right? When they didn't know they were being observed, and it was like a more as natural of a state as you can get. And they just were trying to see, hey, well, is there a difference here, right? And they had the kid's up there on the playground, right? They're doing the monkey bars, they're going down the slide, whatever it is, right? They found an overwhelming pattern. And the pattern was that the women, right, the feminine partner, was on the ground, right, helping the kid if they fell. Right, the mom is watching. She's aware. She's there if the kid gets hurt. She's there to help him or her, get back on their feet. I think that is feminine compassion, right? The father was on the playground with the kid, and the father was challenging the kid to climb higher, or to do the slide a little bit faster, or to try out like a new toy that maybe the kid's like a little bit afraid of, And I think that is masculine compassion or masculine love, right? It's the idea of having a male mentor, right? Another way to think about it is, what I define masculine love and compassion as is setting the goal for somebody, right? For a child, we'll use the example, right? And that's hard enough because you got to set a goal that isn't too easy that the kid feels patronized, and isn't too hard that it just overwhelms or even in the worst case maybe traumatizes your child, right? 'Cause it's just like way too much for them. So you got to set the goal at the right level, which requires a lot of patience, a lot of presence, a lot of just awareness, a lot of like intelligence, right? That's hard enough. But then coach your kid to get to the goal, right? So it's not just like, hey, you go do this and I'll just like hang out on the couch until you're done, but like getting in the trenches with your kid and being that kind of compassionate coach where like, you're there to make sure that they achieve it. And that process over and over again is, I think, what masculine compassion is. It's really helping people to grow progressively.
Yeah, isn't that an evolution in itself? Because the 1950s dad wasn't out there fucking helping anybody, right?
No, 1950 dad, that's what I said. He was just saying the goal. It was like, hey, get straight A's.
Yeah,
Right? But he wasn't sitting there doing the homework with the kid. He wasn't like
yeah,
understanding the kid, help reading to the kid, right? He wasn't that involved. He was just like setting kind of these like directives, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's where I think we struggle with. I think men struggle with in today's world is because we are used to not really being involved in terms of like
Yeah.
my dad didn't do a fuck all around the house. Like he was
Mhm.
he was a truck driver, so he was gone. That was part of it. But B, that's just the way that it was. Like my mom cooked, my mom cleaned, my mom did all that shit. And then and you know you can blame feminism partially, of course, and blame is probably a weird word to use, but you can also blame fucking capitalism because go ahead and
Mhm.
try and have one single household nowadays. But
Yep.
now it's shifted, right? So they're out working, we're working, and they're also conditioned in a way because they were brought up the same way. So they're doing all that shit, but then when I say they, I mean women, obviously, and
Mhm.
they're getting fucking overwhelmed, and we're going, well, I don't know, that's the way it was always been done. And
Mhm.
no one had this fucking conversation with us, right? No one said, hey,
Yeah.
fellas, this is what's going to happen. And obviously, it's in when you look at it face value, it's like, well, duh, of course, like she's out working too. You should be, but no one had that conversation with me, and I don't think with
Mhm.
any of us. Do you see that as sort of a struggle that all men face? I feel like that's the case.
Yeah, I think it is. You know, I mean, just from your story or just maybe me and you, it seems like you're a Gen Xer.
Oh
Is
yeah,
that true? Yeah.
yeah,
And you talk about that, you're like the latchkey kid, right?
yes,
So
sir.
like you didn't really have a father role model like you're talking about. And your whole generation didn't, right? It's not just you. The whole generation, a lot of fathers were traveling a lot for work. That was when sales was huge,
Yeah,
when a lot of like globalization was starting. So
yeah,
men were just really just traveling all over the place. And then
yeah.
me, I'm a little younger, I'm a millennial. We're the children of divorce. Right? Our parents got divorced way more than any other generation.
Hmm.
So many millennials not only didn't have a parent, but saw like a lot of conflict, right? And saw like a lot of anger directed towards men because typically in a divorce, right? And in my generation at least, it's like you end up with your mom, right? And the mom's hurt, the mom's pissed, the mom's gonna be shit talking your dad to you growing up.
Right.
So
Was that your experience?
no, actually, my parents stayed together. They did. There was a lot of shit talk um, from both sides. They
Right.
did kind of like use me as emotional support,
Oh
but
man, so that's a
it's a whole
whole
other issue.
yeah. We
That's a whole other episode. Yeah,
well, I mean, like I said, I am curious. I'm always curious as to how people get to where they are and what they're doing, and why they're doing. But
yeah.
we'll save that for another one. But so one of the things I noticed, in your, and I like defining things. I like having sort of, I'm a ex-military, and so
Yeah,
I'm
cool.
very into like, this is the way, and here's step one and step two. And you mentioned strength, courage. Courage is actually tattooed on my body because it's one
Hmm.
of the core values of the United States Navy.
Yep.
Um, you mentioned mastery and honor. Um, I'm sure in an indirect way, emotions is in there, but I don't see emotions. I don't see what's the tie-in because I feel like that's our biggest challenge nowadays. All this stuff aside of what we just said, which is a challenge, right? But I think the emotions of life and the difficulty of life and managing that is really fucking difficult for men. So, where does the emotions fit in your modern masculine man?
I love that question. It's in all of them. And I'll say that in a moment. But I like that you brought up the army and the armed forces, right? And this idea of like having a code,
Hmm.
because that to me is masculine, right? And that, again, mine are those four pillars. But if you look at, the Navy, right, they have a code, right?
Yep.
If you look at the Knights of the Round Table, they had a code. You look at the samurais, they had a code, right? The Bible is a code, right? I mean, there's something like about having like an ethical, spiritual primer
Yeah.
that I do think is deeply and like ancestrally masculine. And I think a lot of men are lacking that, right? Something that's bigger than yourself that you can kind of lean on when shit gets real, right? You're like, you know what? I believe in strength. I'm going to do the strong thing here, right? Or I believe in honesty. I'm going to do the honest thing.
Yeah.
So that was a tangent, but to answer
No,
your
no, I like
question,
it.
right, is like, I think it's everywhere. So I'll run through how emotions tie in and we can always go more into the pillars in a moment. But like,
Sure.
so strength, right? When you think of strength, most guys think of like how much can you squat, how much can you bench, what's your deadlift, right?
Right, right.
But again, the modern man, strength is not just physical strength, it's also emotional strength,
Yeah.
right? It's like if you're at a funeral, right? Are you strong enough to show up for somebody and have a real conversation about the person that died? Right? If you're at a wedding and say your daughter's getting married, are you strong enough to have a truly emotionally powerful speech for your daughter's wedding? Or do you just kind of blur out, right? Are you strong enough to show up and do that first dance with your daughter and be completely uninhibited and like really become like, have that really special moment for her? right? There's so much more ways to be strong than just how much do you lift. I do think lifting and physical strength is important too. I
Sure.
think there's something very masculine about being fit, right? But emotional strength is something that I think is coming online for men. And when we talk about that toxic masculine kind of bully person, right? They're often very emotionally weak,
Oh,
actually.
1000%. Yeah, agree. Yeah.
Right? You can see how fragile they are, right? You critique them and they just shatter and they get defensive and they get hurtful, right? So they might be physically strong, but they're very emotionally weak. So strength is there, right? Courage, again, very kind of same argument. Emotionally courageous, right? And what they call in therapy, I'm sure you talk about a ton, is like vulnerability, right? Vulnerability just means having a conversation that you don't know how it's gonna go. Right? You're going to say something and you're like, I don't fucking know. I don't know how she's going to respond to this. I don't know what's going to happen. It's truly taking a risk, an emotional risk. And I think that is a version of courage, is like saying the thing that you've never said before, right? It's truly facing your inner demon, right? Or, I'm personally in recovery from drugs and alcohol, right? So, the first day coming and being like, look, hey, my name is Mark Azoulay and I have a problem, right? And the first day of AA, that's a lot of courage required to like truly look those demons in the eye and say something, put that out there in the world, right? Keep going, right? Mastery, emotional mastery is something that men are being called to do, right? It's, before I think it was just anger was the answer to everything, right? Just like might makes right. You're a hammer, everything's a nail,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Amen.
But like
Yeah.
now it's about, again, I work with dudes. So it's like, I like the craftsman metaphor of like having the right tool for the job. Yeah, there is going to be times where your anger is going to be actually pretty useful. There's also going to be times where you have to be compassionate and gentle. There's also going to be times where you have to be very intellectual and sharp. There's times you have to guys shut up and listen, right? And all those are different tools. And like it's about knowing what tool to apply to the job. Again, like masculine, right? We love tools. And then honor, right? Honor, I think emotions is a big part of honor, right? Honor for me is like it's honesty, it's integrity, it's temperance, it's moderation, right? It's all those kind of like ethical standards. And without being in touch with your emotions, you can't be an honorable man. The dishonorable men are the ones that you let their emotions control them, right? Or have suppressed their emotions to a point where they don't have a soul anymore, right? And they're just making decisions for money or for pleasure or for personal gain, but they're not in touch with, the impact of their actions on other people. So yeah, emotions are interwoven into all those pillars.
You crushed it, because I was like, not concerned, but I was curious. Like, how
Yeah.
does, because I do think that, sadly, toxic masculinity is more of the, and people throw a fit when you mention that, because they think that what I'm saying is being masculine is toxic. That's not what the fuck I'm saying. But I do think that toxic masculinity is more of, to some folks, is more masculine than or is the standard for masculinity. Like being an asshole is supposed to be the standard, which I can't agree with that. But I think a lot of folks do think that that's the case.
Yes.
So it was I love your pillars, because again, back to the structure and type stuff. I love that. And B, I love how you interwove emotions into it, because I do think that is the challenge of our time. So speaking of that, because I think there's a reason I think that, right? I wear this bracelet right here for a gentleman who was in the support group that I run, who took his life. And I think his, rest in peace, John, but I think his and many other men's, because if you look at the stats, it's obviously it's bad, and it's tilted towards men, is because I think we have a really hard time with emotions. Why do you think that the suicide rate is so much higher for men than women?
Yeah, when we started over that question, I was like, I can talk about this one all day too. But here's a couple ideas, right? And backed by research too. The first most obvious one, which is kind of brutal, but men's suicide attempts tend to be more violent, significantly more violent. We're talking guns, right?
Yeah,
Guns, pills, hanging, right? Like when we try to kill ourselves, we don't fuck around. So from like just kind of the base layer, like we don't miss, right? Whereas women tend to be a lot more overt. Maybe they're doing something that can be stopped, right? Something that takes longer to kill them, right? Whereas men, like we just do it, right? The other one, which is a big part of what I do at MTO, is a lot of men are super alone. So there's this crazy stat that also came from Richard Reeves, which is 3 in 5 men. They did the survey of like tens of thousands of men. 3 in 5 said that in an emergency, nobody would come to help them. Okay? That's more than half. That's more than half of men.
Yeah.
Right? And that is very concerning. That's the most concerning stat out there. That we feel that alone. So in the event an emergency suicide attempt is an emergency, right? Like in the event of an emergency, in the event of a medical issue, in the event of something, guys feel so alone that nobody would get them, right? Nobody would be there for them. So I think there's this massive loneliness crisis going on where guys feel disconnected. They're not sharing about their feelings. I mean, I'm sorry for your loss of someone in a support group. It sounds like he was trying to get connected with
He
people, with
was.
other guys,
He was.
you
And
know, and I think that, yeah, go ahead.
I didn't mean to cut you off, but I had to write that down because that's something I
Of course.
really want to talk about
Yeah.
is that component.
Mhm.
And maybe we'll just dive into it now.
Yes.
So I run, to my knowledge, the largest men's divorce support group on Facebook. There's 8,000, almost 8,000 men in there. There's nothing of that size for men going through divorce specifically.
Mhm.
And I have tried, as my longtime listeners know, I had at one point put significant effort into trying to create local men's divorce groups throughout the country. Like my vision was the AA for divorced men.
Yeah.
I could not get men out of their fucking houses to hang out with other men, and
Yeah.
it got very frustrating, and I just stopped. I was like, I can't keep banging my head into a wall. Why don't men want to get together?
Mhm. It's really hard. It's really hard. Like I said, I have a number of men's groups. Some of us are divorced dad specific.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, those are the hardest to fill. So I get you. They're really hard to get
Why?
people, to get guys,
Why is that?
because you don't want to be a pussy. I think that's it, right? I think for a guy, again, it's the same thing as like you mentioned AA, right? To go to AA and say, hey, I'm an addict, right? Or to go to a men's group and say, hey, I'm sad, right?
Right.
Or I'm struggling. Like, I think the toxic masculinity stuff is still really strong, especially with the older generations, where like that is completely terrifying. And you know, I have, I guess, like the privilege and the luck of being a therapist. Like most of my divorced dads groups, frankly, it's guys that are my individual clients that I got to work with them for years, literally 1 or 2 years before they were ready to go into a group. And that sucks. Like I feel like I wish your vision could happen because I think men need that more than anything. Is we need to talk to other dudes about shit that matters. And like I think that just like that fear, and I think the idea that men are we're so competitive with each other. Like too, I think there's something good about healthy competition, but I
Sure.
think we're too competitive, and when you don't talk about our competition enough, that like it pushes us away. And a lot of men, especially men that are suffering, feel that every other guy is out to get them, right? There's a lot of jealousy that men feel. There's a lot of disconnection that men feel. There's a lot of just like jockeying. And again, I wish it would be different, but I think admitting that you're weak in some way in front of other guys is very threatening to a lot of men, especially if they've never done therapy before, you know?
Is that a cultural thing in terms of just mostly America or the Western world? Is it, do other cultures in the world have men or behave in the same kind of way, or is it just
So
us?
I think it's mostly America and then trickles down to Western world and trickles down to kind of more industrialized nations. But I think as we become more industrialized, male spaces and specifically male emotional spaces have decreased, right? So if you look at kind of like indigenous cultures, right, there used to be like a men's lodge, right? Or even like look at your local bar or local tavern, right? There are places where men would gather and the assumption is they'd have some real conversations. It wouldn't all just be bluster, but they would talk about what's going on, in their families or with their kids or with their health or whatever. The church was a huge one in this country, and the church is like, over time being slowly deconstructed, right? Like there's not spaces for men to gather. And that, men's groups, right? I mean, I'm happy that you're doing that. That's hopefully going to pick up the mantle, but we don't have that. And also, I think a lot of men in industrialized and digital nations like we are, we work very alone. A lot of people working from home. A lot of people are working in, cubicles. There's not a lot of time to chat. When you think of, again, I don't know how much this happened, but I do think it did. If you think of guys like in a hunting party together, or even working on a farm or in a, even a factory, there's just a shit ton of downtime.
True.
Like you're going to talk to the people around you and there's going to be some connection there
Yeah.
versus just kind of being stuck on a screen emailing everybody, right? There's no time to actually build a connection and to feel like you're part of a team. Plus that competition thing where everyone's jockeying for a position. So even your coworkers are kind of your competitors in a way. So you don't get that camaraderie that I think men really need. I think it is like biological that we need to be in teams. I think we work best in small groups, hunting
Did
parties.
did
Yeah.
did did it evolve to this sort of inability for men to connect, or has it always been this way through, like, millennia or whatever? Like, was there some kind of cultural shift at some point towards more of this? I mean, I know working from home is a
Mhm.
relatively recent thing, but was there something, maybe it's just the expansion of population or whatever, but was there something or did it change or has it always been this way?
I mean, I think it's industrialization is a big one because you get types of jobs that don't encourage camaraderie and aren't as dependent on each other as something as basic as like, again, building a house together. Like you really are depending on your dudes for like life, for your life, right? So industrialization is a big one. I think like the increased pace of life in general in Western society is a big one. We don't have nearly as much leisure, you know. We're supposed to work all the time, and just always be go and generating more capital and spending more money, and it's like this go 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 go. Whereas if you look at like agricultural societies, like they have a whole season winter where you don't do shit,
Right.
right? Like you can't, you're just inside talking to people, trying not to like drink yourself to death, but like you're communicating, you're doing crafts, you're fixing things around your house. Like you have a time to go in introspective and be able to like connect with yourself and the people around you, right? So I think that's a big one for sure. But I mean, if you look at through history, right, there have been emotional men, and I also want to touch on that because you asked about, what does male compassion look like? I also want to talk about like what does male emotion look like, and it's like you don't have to go back too far. Look at Martin Luther King. Look at some of his speeches. Look at Gandhi's speeches. Look at Winston Churchill's speeches, right, that they gave. Those are extremely emotional men, but they're not like crying alone
Right.
on their couch, right? I think when men think about emotions, we think about that. We think of like just being like a sad sack of shit, like
Right.
just having a pity party.
Right.
But
Right.
these are three men that I mentioned. There's tons of others that like were able to leverage emotions for power, for motivation, for inspiration. And if you go back to ancient history, you look at some of Caesar's speeches or some of these kings, right? There's always this like really powerful emotional thread that would move men, like emotionally move men, which would then physically move men. So like I think we are capable, and I think we
Oh
respond
yeah.
really well to emotions. It just has been squashed down, I think, in like industrialized society more so
Mm.
than it needs to be.
The successes that you've had with men, sort of to get them out of your office and into a group. How do you take that from the micro and make it a macro? In other words, how can I apply what you did to one particular man and apply it to 8,000 men to see if I can get them out? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, look, I'd love to help you. Maybe we can chat a little bit offline if there's
Sure, sure.
collaboration potential. But like the big kind of breakthrough that happens for my guys, and I don't know how to do it at scale. I mean, we can chat about that. Is like realizing that there's more going on. So I'll talk about that a little bit, right? So like you have a guy who comes in post divorce, and understandably, he's focused on the money. He's focused on where am I going to live. He's focused on am I going to ever see my kids again. He's focused on all that because he's in survival mode. Totally get it,
Yep.
right? Then you work with a therapist for a while. Things calm down. You get those kind of pillars in place, and then the question comes up, which I love the question of like, how did I get here?
Mm,
That's an important question
mm,
because once a man can move from being a victim, a lot of guys feel like a victim, especially if the wife initiated divorce. When you moved from a victim to trying to take responsibility for your life, even though it might not be your fault, but you're taking responsibility,
yeah.
it's like, what went wrong?
Right.
And it's nuanced. So, like, yeah, sure, maybe your wife was like 80% a bitch, but you're still 20% an asshole, right? Like, there's still something that went wrong, And once you can crack that open, then it's like, okay, like maybe I suck at listening. How did I learn to be bad at listening? Oh, now it's my childhood. Now it's my father. Now it's like some trauma I had as a kid, and then it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And once you get a guy who is at that level, he wants to connect because I think it wakes us up. It wakes up to be like, oh man, there were some wounds from growing up, and I do want to be around other guys that are able to talk at this level, right? Because they've wanted it the whole time, and they realize that they don't want to be alone anymore. That it's not strong to be alone, right? It's strong to be in a team. You can only accomplish great things with other people, right? Everything great was done by teams. Nothing was solo, and like it's crazy. And maybe you had this experience with the groups that you run. Is like once you get a guy in there, they love it and they never leave.
Right.
It's just getting them in there, right?
Yeah.
It's just doing the first step, which is really, really difficult.
Yeah. I want to go back to something that you said that victim is a big word,
Yeah.
and it's one that I think is tricky in a way because I think for me, and I think guys that experienced the things that I did, I was a victim in a way. You know,
Mhm.
I was cheated on, I was left, I was lied to, my money was taken, my kids were taken, all those kinds of things. But at some point, and this is the tricky part, I think, you have to stop being a victim. How
Yes.
do you thread that needle? Like what do you how do you how long do you let a man how long how big of a space, how time period, whatever, do you let a man be a victim and before you start saying, okay, brother, I hear you. I'm sorry, but let's turn the page. And I know that's not a fair question in some ways because everybody's different. But just give me your general like guideline, maybe to when you know as a therapist,
Yeah.
like okay, it's time for this guy to turn the page.
Yeah. Typically is when the emotion dies down. So I'll talk about kind of an example. So say, yeah, let me organize my thoughts. I think a lot of men, we are victims to stuff, right? Especially as children, right?
Right.
There's no excuse for, having an abusive parent that hits you, or God forbid, being sexually assaulted, right? Or, if you're a combat veteran and you got your arm blown off, right? Like there are stuff that like that shit just fucking happened to you and
Yeah.
you didn't deserve it. And like, yes, you are a victim of that situation.
Yes.
True. However, right, you then have to become responsible for your new reality,
Yeah.
right? If
100%.
you had an abusive father and now you have an anger problem, like the anger problem might be his fault in a way, but it's up to you to work on it. It's up to you to make sure that you don't perpetuate that with somebody else,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's up to you to heal those wounds, right? You didn't cause them, but you got to be responsible for the healing.
Yeah.
Because if you just sit there in a victim mentality, those wounds are going to fester and they're eventually going to kill you, you know? So back to the answer to the question of when the emotion starts to die down is a lot of guys, again, because I think we don't have these spaces, we're not even in touch with the pain of those things. So, say you have a guy, we'll use abusive father just as an example, right? Has the abusive father. Most guys, 8 guys out of 10 are going to say like, yeah, my dad hit me, but like, it's fine. Everyone was doing that. Like it's whatever,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Like it's all good, right? It takes a level just to be able to, for them to be like, holy shit, that was fucked up. To be like, maybe cry about it, maybe get angry at their father, maybe actually touch into that experience of what it was like when they were 5 and they were getting hit,
Yeah.
if you're a listener out there that you guys feel defended, like what I tell my clients is like, hey, just go around, don't be a creeper, but like look at 5-year-olds. Like if you were getting hit when you were 5, look at 5-year-olds and look at how innocent
Yeah.
and weak and fragile and cute and helpless
Yeah.
they are.
Yeah.
And like imagine hitting that, right? It's like that really helps guys is to be able to externalize it to other people, right? Because we always imagine ourselves being the same but being smaller, right? Where it's like, no,
Yeah.
you were like a baby,
Yeah.
So, first get in touch with the pain. I think men have to go through and heal that pain. That can take, I don't know, timeline, I don't know, 6 months, a year.
Yeah.
Usually some kind of creative process. I like having guys do ritual work in some of my retreats or, writing letters or going, burning things, right? Somewhere you can really just like
Yeah.
express it and really, really like grieve it, right? Have a funeral for it, really grieve it. And then at some point it's not as charged. And then it's like, okay, man, like we drain the wound. What are you going to do about it? Because the wound's still here,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So like, what are you going to do about it? Because it's going to have those ripple effects again. Maybe you have an anger problem, maybe you have a drinking problem, maybe you are afraid of your anger and you're a nice guy and you're shut down. I mean, there's 10,000 ways to deal with it, but now you got to start healing it so that you can come back to becoming a full man, right? You can retrieve that part of you that was hurt in the past. And I think, I'll go as bold as to say is like, for me, that is the definition of a man versus a boy. Is a man is somebody who takes responsibility for every single thing in his life, even those that are out of his control. Again, you're responsible for how you respond to it,
Yeah.
right? And a boy is somebody that is in a victim mentality. I think that's a very like immature place to be.
Yeah. No, agreed. And sad to say, I think there's a whole lot of grown men walking around that aren't grown.
Yes.
Sadly.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Emotional age and physical age are not are not related,
not at all.
Yeah.
I want to talk about something you sort of mentioned because you mentioned retreats and stuff. I've never done one. I've always been fascinated. I would love to do one. If you want to ever invite me out, that's fine.
Come on, we got one in April. Yeah.
All right. Well, I turned 48 in April, so
Yeah.
we'll link up and figure that one out. How important is nature sort of and being outdoors and stuff? Is that to sort of healing and growth and masculinity even?
I mean, I think it's critical, right? I mean, it's primal, right? It's natural. It transcends culture, right? Like, There's a great writer who I like where he talks about like, what men do is we build camps, right? So this idea of like we take nature and we turn it into civilization. We go out there, we scout, we build walls, we raise the tents, we make the fire. Like we are creating order in the world, right? Where we're taming the wilds. And there's something like very primally masculine about that, right? It kind of treads the line between the animalistic part of us that we have to acknowledge and love, and then the human part that brings in our intellect and our skills and our engineering. So there's something like, and for guys now, I mean, I'm lucky to live in Colorado, so nature is a big part of where we are. But for a lot of guys that throw on the East Coast or West Coast, or they live in an urban environment, they're just not connected to it. They're just not. They're living online, right? They're playing video games that mimic nature, right? But there is something just so bonding about going out with a bunch of dudes into a somewhat hostile environment. I don't take it anywhere crazy, but a somewhat hostile environment and surviving together. I mean, I imagine you as a veteran have experienced a version of that, right? Of like really like relying on other guys, even if it's like, hey, you do dinner, I'll raise the tents, hey, I'll go get some firewood. Like we fall into those roles so naturally, and we need it, And I think also for a lot of guys, and I'll pause in a moment, but like for a lot of guys, we feel like our emotions are really big and nothing can handle them, right? Our partners can't handle them, we can't handle them, maybe our friends can't handle them. A mountain can handle it, right?
Yeah.
So like when you have a guy screaming from the top of the mountain, I can share an example if you want, but like when you have a guy that is like, yeah, well, okay, so the most recent retreat that we did, right? It was called the burdens that we carry. So basically the retreat is we're going to go to the base of a mountain, a 13er. So it's a 13,000 foot mountain. So no joke to climb up. We have 14,000 foot mountains in Colorado, but those are always crowded. So there's a lot of 13ers that are not as crowded, so I can do this crazy shit on there. So we hike in, we backpack in, we establish a base camp, right? During the base camp, we do a men's circle around a fire. And I ask guys to find something from nature that represents a burden that they've been carrying, and the more uncomfortable, the better. So it could be a big ass rock. It could be like a spiky stick. It could be some thorns. It could be like, I don't know, some pine cones, like something that's like, scratchy, irritating, whatever, right? And the burden can be anything emotional. It can be a grief that you've had, but something that like, it really embodies that. And we talk about it, we share it, we kind of imbue in the meaning. Everyone's telling their story and they're sharing their little artifact, right? Of like, this is why I picked it. So it's charged, right? It gets charged with that emotions, right? Then we climb the 13er. Right? And they have to carry the thing. And again, the challenge is like carry it in the most uncomfortable way possible that won't, compromise the mission. Right. So you have guys that like have these big rocks in a backpack, right? Or you have a guy that has like the thorn that's like wrapped around his arm, right? Or somebody that has a pine cone on his chest, so every time he moves, it scratches him, right? So it sucks, right? It just sucks to carry it. And it's like you're carrying the burden, right? So we're kind of like physiologically, carrying the burden. We get to the top of the mountain, we have another circle, and each guy gets a moment to release the burden. And release the burden means you throw that shit off the mountain, right? You throw it off the mountain. And guys break down and they have breakthroughs in the best way. You have guys that are crying, you have guys that are screaming, you have guys that are just like finally feeling that relief of getting rid of something. Because you've walked like 4 hours with this thing up a hill, and the mountaintop can hold your emotions, right? Even if the guys are like, maybe overwhelmed by the experience, some guys are, but you look around and it's like, holy shit, nature is holding me. You're in this beautiful place. You're on the summit of like the top of the world, and like you're able to have your emotion. And of course, everyone gives you a big hug. You get a lot of like positive validation. We climb down. It's easier going down and you don't have the shit on you, right? And then we do some more men's groups and stuff at the bottom. But that's just kind of a quick example of like how to really use nature to create these powerful experiences for men.
Yeah, I gotta imagine it wouldn't be as effective like in a conference room or whatever, right?
No, right? Yeah, it's like it would feel hokey, right? It would feel lame. It would feel like it's like what are you gonna do? It's like put it in the trash? You're gonna like get your little stick and like put it in the garbage can? Like get out of here, right? But when you throw this shit 13,000 feet down into like some rocky terrain, like that's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
It's symbolic, right? I mean, it's real world in a way. Yeah, that sounds awesome. I want to shift to one more thing. Maybe this might even open up a 17 other things, but all of us, I think, right, have for men we're dominantly masculine, right? But there's also some feminine, and so how
Mhm.
does in the other way for women, dominantly feminine, but there's some masculine. For a man, how do you? What is that balance? What does my feminine side mean, or how do I integrate, incorporate? Do I need to like what you know what I'm saying? Like I think that's a part
Yep.
of us, but how do you navigate that thing?
Yep. Yep. Great question. So this comes from kind of like tantric studies, right, that look at kind of ancient like yin and yang energy, feminine, masculine energy. There's a sexual component. We don't have to get too much into that, though you can ask me about it.
Right.
But so essentially, what they say is the masculine energy is containing, right? So as men, what we do is we create order, we create structure, we create boundaries, right? We are a containing force. And the feminine energy is a receptive force, right? It's taking in, right? It's taking in pleasure, it's taking in sensation, it's taking in the world around, it's taking in relationships, it's taking in love. So when you talk about the feminine side, I have a little bit different view. Like I don't think the feminine side is like, oh, get your nails done, or like go to the spa, or like dress up. Like that's fine. That's like surface level kind of accoutrement, right?
Right.
But I think the feminine side that I think men do have to get in touch with is being able to truly receive from the world,
Mm.
right? So many men, and I think the toxic masculine is the most extreme version of this. It's all output. It's like, right, what can I give? What can I produce? How much money can I make? It's all like output.
Yeah.
But these men are very alone,
Yeah.
right? And even the most gentle, soft guy is often still alone, not able to really receive and be present.
Mm.
So I think as men, we have to learn how to receive. We're never going to receive in the way a woman receives, right? They are the most receptive, pure feminine, beautiful goddess creatures, right? But
Yes.
like as men, being able to like slow down and appreciate a sunset to kind of go back to nature, right? Or to like actually, release and relax during a massage. I think for a lot of guys, they can finally receive when they're in like a massage state because they've like paid the person, right?
Right. Right.
Or to be able to like take in a compliment, right? I mean, so many guys, me included, I don't, and this is my job, more often than not, when someone compliments me, I'm like, yeah, whatever, like here's something good about you, right? Like I like
Yeah.
can't get it in. And I've been doing this shit for
I
years.
literally,
Yeah.
I literally wrote down receive compliments because yeah, I'm fucking terrible at it, and I'm
Yeah.
sure you get them all the time. I get them pretty frequently for doing this thing, and it's never very
Hey,
comfortable. We were act there. I have a book club. I have a
cool.
Discord server that's around the podcast and around divorce support, and we have a book club on Thursday nights, and that was one of the things we talked about last night. To a T, all the men were like, yeah, no, I'm very bad. I don't like compliments. All of us, every single one of us, and I'm
All
like,
of us.
oh, that's something. So what is that? Is that a masculine um trait to block that or not receive that? So it's not a masculine trait, right? So that's where we need to sort of get in touch with the feminine side.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what it is, it's a fear of intimacy, right? It's like, oh shit, if I truly receive this compliment, and what I mean by receiving isn't just saying like, oh, thank you, right? Like
Right, right.
pretending. It's
Yeah.
like actually feeling something.
Hmm.
We're talking about a real emotion, right? Like when someone says, hey, I really appreciate the work that you're doing out there in the world with divorced dads, right? Like feeling a welling of emotion, maybe feeling a little bit of, tears behind the
Sure.
eyes, feeling a
Yeah.
little bit of warmness in your chest, right? It doesn't have to be too extreme, but actually truly, right? Like it getting in there. That's hard for guys. Again, still hard for me. But that is intimacy,
Yeah.
right? Like if I were to say that to you and you were to feel something, it would mean that you and I mattered to each other, right? On some level,
Yeah. Yeah.
which means that if I were to die or go away, it would hurt you because I matter. And I think a lot of men are really defended from that hurt, from that emotional hurt, right? We don't want to connect with other people, other men, our partners, our kids, because we're trying to preemptively defend from the hurt that can come from if we let somebody in, right? If we let someone in, then they can, like I said, they can really hurt us,
Can
you
we
know?
change that? Is that changeable?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The way it's changeable, which, is a whole nother topic on like kind of nice guys. I think a lot of guys now are nice guys, which is like conflict avoidant. It's changeable by like actually kind of stress testing it and going through real meaningful conflict with the people that we love and care about and knowing that's going to be okay. They're like, hey, we can be mad at each other, but we still love each other, right? We can disagree and we can work towards a solution. We can have these moments where it's not all perfect or like, as a man, you don't have to take on everything, right? And it's going to be okay. Really letting yourself like fall into a relationship with somebody else, right? Typically a romantic partner. It's work and it's really scary and it makes us feel really out of control, but it's important. It's important for us to not be so alone, which I think most men are. I think most men are really, really alone.
Yeah, I see it every day.
Yeah.
Specifically, Wednesdays I post in the Facebook group, but just a check in, like how's everybody doing? What are you struggling with? And the large majority of the comments are I'm alone. I feel so lonely, and like gosh, boy do I understand that, because this weekend I don't have my kids.
Mhm.
I mean, I got something on Sunday because one of them has a concert, but I got nothing to do. I got friends I could reach out to if I really wanted to. I'm not devoid of friendship, but there's no one like, you know, there's nothing planned. There's no like, I don't have anything going on, and that can feel at times very fucking lonely and very isolating. Now, this is where sort of back to the earlier. I could reach out to people. Why the fuck don't I? I don't know,
Yeah.
but I don't. So anyway, I could
We're
talk to
not
you
trained
all.
to. Yeah.
Yeah, I could talk to you all day about this shit, man. But we're running on time here. Let's jump to the last question. Unfortunately, because I really do feel like I could talk to you all day. But with that said, I think it would be nice to have a few minutes offline just to have a conversation. So,
Mhm.
the last question that I ask everybody is, what words of wisdom would you impart to a man that is just beginning his divorce journey?
Yeah. I mean, one, I guess, kind of riffing on what you just said, is like you're not alone. And I think there's great organizations like yours where people can come and talk with other guys that have been through it. So I'd say like you're not alone. I'd say you're not the asshole, right? It's not entirely your fault, but you need to take responsibility for the parts that are, right? And it's not about her, right, or him, right? It's not about your partner, right? Like they're not going to be right. It's not about them being right about you. It's about you growing and changing and making sure you don't find yourself in the same situation again. And my hope is that like this divorce, even though it probably feels like a rock bottom, and it is a rock bottom for a lot of men, that it's the beginning of a big climb. Like now's the time to wake up and look around and take inventory of your life.
Amen. How can people find you, Mark? What's the best way for them to get in touch with you if they want to learn more or maybe work with you or hire you or whatever?
Yeah, so best thing is the website, Men's Therapy Online. The website is menstherapy.online. Everything is there. We're also on every single social media platform under Men's Therapy Online, and I have a podcast called the Men's Therapy Podcast. All my branding is it's very direct.
You got it.
So the website, menstherapy.online, is probably the best way to go. Everything is on there.
Awesome. Mark, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much for watching and or listening. Since my separation in July of 2019, I have done an incredible amount of work on myself. I've had many different therapists, life coaches, and went through different programs. I've taken all that I've learned and put it into my own program called Forged by Fire. If you are interested in having me help you navigate your divorce, please hit my website, risingphoenixdivorcecoach.com. I look forward to working with you.